This is your Chargers linebacker, Daiyan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, count it down, baby. 4 days remaining until the 2024 NFL Draft. Like I've said, these last just few weeks, it's just the anticipation is just you're always geared there. You're like, can we just get to April 25th already and be done with it and just end all the speculation and pump up the drama? Let's go to work. And every single year, it's always when April 1st hits, the days just drag like dog years. It just feels like it takes forever to get there. But we're so close. We're so close. So obviously, Sunday morning live show with all of you guys. Hope you brought your caffeine and your hot takes ready for the show. Dan and I are going to try to go through as much as we can because I know every one of us has a lot that we want to get off our chest going into next Thursday. But Dan Wolkenstein, before we kick everything off, how are you, sir?
I am good. Honestly, I'm still battling bit through jet lag. So if I sound like a frog, it's because I'm battling through all of it. But I'm here with all of you. Chargers fans, Jake said it, we're just 4 days. I still can't believe we are just 4 days away from the NFL draft. Tons of stuff coming. We got a special guest episode this week. Lots of content we're going to be pushing out between now and draft day. Still got some position rankings to go through. You guys know the deal. Live shows are the best. Everyone in the comments, leave your topics, thoughts, questions you'd like us to discuss. I already have a bunch flowing through here. Again, thank you all so much for everything, for all the comments, for all the likes, for all the subscriptions that you guys have taken. It helps us out tremendously. Jake, we have smoke screens everywhere, and it's been that way for seemingly months.
Sound the alarm.
As we get closer and closer to draft day, it's getting more and more insane. There's some folks in the chat that are kind of already talking about some of the rumors that we've seen from accounts that honestly I'd never even heard of until this past week. And so I guess like overall, like first off the top, like what do you make of all of these smoke screens, rumors? Do you see any of them that actually have any sort of validity to them? Like people in the chat are talking about like the CT ESPN trade rumors from Forgotten Locale. He talks about it. There was someone else that was talking about it as well, but like anything, I saw something about Michael Thomas and I was like, what? And then I saw this, I was like, hell no. Like, what are we doing here?
Just look who's tweeting out the information. That's all I'll say. CT ESPN, okay. And they're pulling it from who?
Also, the fact that it's CT ESPN, which like that kind of sounds like a concussion thing.
Look,
I don't know.
Look, they I guess they had predicted or had broken the news shortly before the Stephon Diggs trade. But in this particular circumstance about Justin Herbert being part of a trade to Minnesota, and then it sounds like they were almost debunking their own report 12 hours later.
It's so dumb.
Like Dan said, you know, where there's smoke, there is some fire, but just try to weed out, you know, some of the smoke.
Yeah. And again, like people are desperate for clicks and are desperate for getting attention and driving through engagement. So like, I get why some people are just throwing everything out there, but like, there are some things that are just hard nosed, never going to happen. Like anytime I see, Chargers are going to trade Justin Herbert for anything, you can end that discussion. Not happening. We did see discussions this week about the Chargers meeting up with a certain wide receiver in Costa Mesa. Who knows what will come of that? So we'll talk about that as well. But folks in the chat, go ahead and give us your questions. We'll kind of discuss some of the trends, some of the things that we're seeing for all things NFL draft for this Los Angeles Chargers team, possible trade scenarios. We'll go through some possible dilemmas that the Chargers could face. Right off the top, Jake. Dan Siegel says, good morning, fellas. Not sure if you saw, but on the director's channel, I did not see this. His bold prediction is us ending up with 12 picks in the draft. Like I mentioned last time, I'm willing 12 picks into existence. They currently sit at 9. So let's play this one out. Let's just say they trade back in round 1. That probably picks up, let's say it's the Minnesota one, 11 and 20, whatever. So that's an additional 1 pick. Maybe they pick up an additional 2nd pick in the draft as well. So maybe they call that 11. So that means they're trading back at least 1 more time. Odds of that happening.
I feel like we answered this question actually something similar to this a couple of weeks ago when I think we put like the over under at 10 that they were going to end up with, and we were saying the over. In this particular circumstance, especially if you take it back to what Joe Hortiz said earlier this week in terms of trade, sounded very open to trading and acquiring more picks, but also very aggressive to say, hey, look, what are you going to give me to get me to either move off a pick at 5 or not looking for fair? I'm looking to fleece, not looking for any of these. Yeah, it's good for you, it's good for us type of trade. So look, I mean, most of the teams that you see that end up having that many picks, even to start out with, we've seen Kansas City historically have picks like that to start even before the draft gets underway. It gives you more draft ammunition to ultimately give yourself an avenue to move up in the draft. So who knows how the Chargers could end up working this board? Because they could end up trading down, getting some more draft capital. As you said, Dan, they have 9 to start as it stands right now. But if you gain a little bit more, does that necessarily take you away then from taking that ammunition and then moving up to get a player that you absolutely like? So I like the idea of having 12 picks. If you were to actually have that on for your roster when you end up getting into training camp, that's 12 roster spots that essentially you're looking to possibly put on the team come the beginning of the season, which I don't find very likely. So I'm going to still hover around the 10 spot.
Yeah, the 9.5 over under I think is a good one. It was a good one before the Keenan Allen trade, so maybe 10.5 might be the number now. I think I would go over 11. I think 11 is probably the number. But again, like as much as we say they might trade back, like they might trade up too. Like they might do both, which they've done. So like just because they trade back doesn't mean that's just going to be a trade back. Shane Wilkerson says, can we just trade back? Like the Chargers haven't seen this in decades. And I think this is kind of, and I've had some like come to Jesus moments, I guess, if you want to call it that, about like trade back scenarios and what the Chargers need and all that kind of stuff. And there was Willie Bowen put this question in here. Will the Chargers have depth at the wide receiver position? I'll let you answer this first, Jake. Will the Chargers have depth at the wide receiver position come week 1?
It's a very open-ended question because it's like right now, how would you classify the Chargers wide receiver room in general? Would you classify? I mean, it's
not deep.
It's basically just if you were to put it in terms of like, building a house, essentially what you have is the studs of the house is what you have right now. You don't really have the drywall. You don't have the supporting
I don't even know
beams
if I'd
yet.
say the studs. Yeah, you might have the drywall in the windows, but no studs.
Yeah, I mean, so take it. I love this open-ended question. Like, will they have depth at wide receiver? I mean, who knows? I mean, it's not much of a receiving room as it currently stands right now. There's a lot of work to be done for the wide receiver position. Dan and I have talked about, as I know many others have, is the possibility of the Chargers even double dipping in this draft for wide receiver room because it's so deep. And then, as I know we're going to get into this, as Dan kind of touched on, we know that the Chargers have met and have had interest with Martez Valdez-Scantling, with DJ Chark, with Tyler Boyd that's been floated out there. So are those possibly any moves between those three that are going to happen after the draft weekend to round out the roster, depending on how everything falls to them and who is ultimately selected? It'll be interesting, but you have an overhaul for this wide receiver room that you definitely need to address. And for many out there, a lot of them hope that it starts at number 5.
So I think depth and will they be deep at the position? Like that's you mentioned it, a very loose question because the team could have depth But will it be top end deep? Different question. As much as Chargers fans, even myself, like I'll admit it, like I would love to see them get one of those top 3 receivers. And I think it would be massive for this Chargers team and for the long-term health of the roster, specifically at a position that is so premium, that is making so much money. To have one of those guys on rookie contract for 4 years plus a 5th-year option, like that's huge. But so this is where, and maybe I'm the bad cop here.
Dramatic
This is
pause.
just me. This is just me kind of thinking through a lot of this stuff. Realistically, when has Joe Ortiz or Jim Harbaugh at any of his stops, their stops, during their tenure, had like a bona fide wide receiver 1? Like whenever they had a bona fide wide receiver 1. Like if you go back to Michigan, you could say Nico Collins, but that's not really. You can say, Roman Wilson. I wouldn't say so. In Baltimore, they probably maybe tried with Bateman, but that was like a late first round pick. Zay Flowers, I don't think is a bona fide. I think he's a good wide receiver 2. I don't think he's a bona fide wide receiver 1. He's not a wide receiver 1. He's not.
Don't agitate me, Dan.
No, but I guess what I'm getting at is, do we really think that this team thinks they need a bona fide wide receiver 1? I don't know the answer, and I'm kind of leaning towards no. And if that's the case, I know people are so in their heels about like offensive tackle at 5. But here's the thing. I think what people are agitated, or what they're like presumptively going to be pissed off about, is this team, Joe Ortiz and company, have talked about the whole best player available thing like for weeks. And we've seen it for months. We've seen it for years with Joe Ortiz. And in my opinion, your opinion, 99% of experts' opinions and fans' opinions, best player available at 5, there's no way that is going to be anyone other than a wide receiver for this Chargers team. Whether it's Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, whoever. But let's say they say, we're going to go Joe Alt or Fuaga or Latham or whoever at 5. Take out the BPA thing for a second and just focus on, let's just say the theme, the message is, we need to protect our quarterback. We need an offensive line that can get nasty, that can block, that can ensure that this team can run finally. We're going to protect the house and let Justin Herbert throw to whoever, because he can make anybody look great. We're going to put less on his shoulders. I don't necessarily think you can fault the team for prioritizing protecting Justin Herbert and establishing a run game, because those are the two things that this team hasn't been able to do forever. And some could say, well, yeah, but it's the interior offensive line that's been an issue, which I would agree. Some people would say, well, yeah, it's the tight ends and running backs who haven't been able to block on the outside. I would agree. But you're not going to draft those guys at 5, I don't think. So if you're trying to protect him, you're trying to establish a run game, that's the rationale behind going offensive tackle early. I know people will get pissed off, and I personally don't want them to go offensive tackle at 5, because that flies to the face of what they've been saying about BPA. But if they go that route, they'd be doing it to protect Justin Herbert. In my eyes, that's what I'm guessing that they would say. Protect Justin Herbert, establish a run game, and solidify your offensive line for whatever, a decade. Rashawn Slater on one side, whoever else on the right side. I'm not necessarily sure if it's going to happen. I love these receivers. I just don't know. And the other part is too, honestly, Jake, is like, it really all depends on what Arizona does. I think that that's kind of the linchpin of this draft, because you and I've said it. If they trade back and it goes QB 1 through 4, I cannot see a world in which they pass on Marvin Harrison Jr. I can't. Like, I even said all of that. I cannot see it. But if Arizona sticks and picks and they go Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Chargers don't get enough, that's the world that I'm concerned about, is what happens then at 5. And maybe they go
interesting still.
Neighbors.
Yeah, interesting still, because, the favorite player of yours in this entire draft is Malik Neighbors. So obviously you've been telling me off the air, if the Chargers ultimately ended up selecting Malik Neighbors at 5, which a lot of people believe is a great selection. Some people actually have him as their number 1 wide receiver in this draft, understandably. But everything that you've just laid out for the Chargers draft scenario, the biggest thing to me, Dan, is, yes, outside of the BPA conversation that Joe Ortiz is having, it's his talk about trading out of that pick. To me, you don't sit there and make this whole long statement about, we're not looking for a fair trade, that's going to work for both sides. I want to get what's mine. So what's it going to take to get you to come up and take me off of a player at 5? To me, that sounds like, if we're looking for a king's ransom, that to me does not spell like a team that is looking to draft an offensive tackle at 5. Agreed. That to me spells like a team that is looking to draft a wide receiver, possibly one of the best players in this draft, in Marvin Harrison Jr., if he's still there on the board. That's what that speaks to me. Now, I'm with you in terms of, it's ultimately a trade back and you're trying to fortify that offensive line one way or another. It's still not my personal preference on the first way to go. I've always been of the belief that if the Chargers were to trade back to 11, then my entire board would shift towards corner, because you're out of the realm of the top 3 wide receivers at that point. And at 11, I would probably be looking at Terrion Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell at that point in time.
Or tackle, honestly. Yeah.
I mean, you still could, but again, tackle is a very deep class, especially in the top, in the few rounds it is.
It's deep. I think it's deep in round 1.
It's deep in round 1, but a lot of people are also going to be looking to take a tackle in round 1.
That's
so I would throw out that I still believe that center is a bigger priority to get right now than a tackle. And that's just my preference on it. So,
but I guess I push back. So right now or long term, which one's more important for this team? A right tackle or center?
Well, as it stands right now, contractually, Bradley Bozeman is only on a 1-year deal, so he's your stopgap option. Yep. You need to get a long-term center to be there with Justin Herbert.
Pipkins is there for years. 1 more year.
They're not going to stop trying to beef up the offensive line. I'm not saying that that's not going to happen with Jim Harbaugh. But you listen to Joe Ortiz's comments this week, and that's where it tells me that his priority is at 5. It's either at a trade down, or if you can't give me enough to move off of 5, I'm going to be selecting a wide receiver. That's what it tells me.
I think I'm with you. Snoop Boy says, we lost 2 top wide receivers. That should be our priority. I think it should be a priority. And there's a lot of ways to accomplish filling in those gaps of those receivers. Like, you don't just have to do it at 5. We've just talked about, like, the Boyd, the Shark, OBJ is still out there. There's still guys there. There's still round 2. There's still trade back options. Like, there's still a bunch of other ways to get wide receiver depth than just at 5. And again, like, if you're, and I'm more just like helping to maybe brace for this, like, keep your options open here a little bit for Chargers fans, because, like, it feels like things are very pigeonholed right now. And there's like a very narrow lane that Chargers fans, for the most part, are wanting to drive through. And it seems like there's like 4 or 5 very likely scenarios that could happen. Like, the Chargers could stay at 5. They could trade back. They could stay at 5 with the quarterback still being needed. They could stay at 5 without a quarterback still being needed. They could trade back and have 2 options. They could trade back and have more than those. They could trade back twice. Like, a whole bunch of things. But all of those are kind of predicated on, like, what's available and what they can get in return. And I just, like, I think what I realized is, as much as the Chargers have gone through talking and Joe Ortiz has talked about, I'm going to do best player available philosophy, and Jim Harbaugh's on board with that, and BPA. Like, that's been talked about ad nauseum. But they've also talked about ad nauseum how important the offensive line game is, how important it is to beef up the trenches, how important it is to protect Justin Herbert, how important it is to beef up a run game finally. Like, they've talked about that more than they talked about BPA. So, like, we can't be surprised at either one of those, because both of them seem to be, like, a huge priority. So, like, would it be that shocking? I know Chargers fans want a wide receiver because, realistically, I think we're all in it to help, like, finally restore Justin Herbert's like, all right, he now has his guy, now watch him cook. Do you think this team, the organization, like, is that what they're trying to prove? Like, that Justin Herbert's that guy and he can go toe-to-toe with anybody else because he has the weapons that they do? I don't think so.
You never shy away from getting good players, whether it's a weapon option for your quarterback 100%. Or if it's protection for your quarterback. But here's the one last thing I will push back on, Dan. We definitely would have to assume, again, this is just an assumption because it can't get much worse than it has been for Justin Herbert from an offensive line standpoint the last couple of years, but we would expect this new coaching regime to get better overall production out of this offensive line. And whether that's the same starting five that started last year that ends up starting this year, we would expect the production to get better. So I think that's the other thing that we're not taking into much account for it is that, like, even the example, remember I've told you several occasions, whoever the Chargers end up drafting at center gets to learn behind Nick Hardwick.
And Bozeman.
Not just Bozeman, but Nick Hardwick. I mean, that's a great thing to think about. So, coaching standpoint, you'd have to believe that that's going to fill in a huge gap in terms of how this offensive line is going to produce moving forward.
Forgotten Locale says, I'd argue getting a solid corner is a bigger need than a receiver.
That's a good argument.
I would agree.
It's a good argument. I get it. You're missing two in the wide receiver room, but there is not much from a corner standpoint that you look at from this depth chart that really gets you excited.
Speaking of corner, look at the trade market for CB1, Larry Reed says. No true shutdown corner at the top of this draft.
I mean, if you're comparing this to say, like, okay, there's no Sauce Gardner in this draft, then okay, I get you in that circumstance. But there are definitely some corners in this class with shutdown capability. That's for sure. And the beauty part about it is there's a lot of potential there with these guys, whether you're talking about Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell, Nate Wiggins. You go further down the line in this draft, as far as guys that you can make this secondary out of, there's really good talent.
Yep. Gary Rockwell with a $5 donation shoots up to the top. Thank you so much, Gary. You're the best, man. Hey, guys, just finished reading an Athletic article on Luke McCaffrey. Excuse me, possible third or fourth round pick. No need to press the wide receiver button too early. Now, Luke McCaffrey, like, fun. Great. Not wide receiver one. But again, I go back to, does this new offense need a bona fide wide receiver one?
Maybe this is
look what the Ravens did last year.
Okay. But I'll also ask you this, Dan. First of all, number one, you cannot compare last year's wide receiver class to this year's wide receiver class.
I'm saying look at
polar opposite.
I think last year's Baltimore receivers.
Right, but hear me out on this. When was the last time either Jim Harbaugh or Joe Ortiz, respectively, was sitting in the number 5 position in the draft with 3 wide receivers, the likes of Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Roma Dunze, that they could possibly select? And to me, that trumps the historical factor of what they do traditionally when you look at the talent there. And then when you talk about BPA, Dan, as you said, there's no big board out there that's going to have an offensive tackle rated above one of these 3 wide receivers.
Agreed. Larry Reed wanted to put me in check a bit earlier. Dan Harbaugh wanted Julio at 6, was jumped by Atlanta. Other than that, Harbaugh Hurties haven't been in the position to get a bona fide blue chip wide receiver one before. Agreed. Acknowledged. I'm not saying that I'm saying they haven't done it. They have not done it. Maybe he's tried to get Julio. I get it. I honestly don't know what their offensive line looked like when they were possibly going to go get Julio. I'm just saying, given what they have said, the priority that they have said over and over and over and over again about protecting Justin Herbert, beefing up the offensive line, establishing a run game, like Chargers fans, I think, should just brace for if they go that direction. While it might not be who we think is BPA, they might be thinking, we're going to protect Justin Herbert and run the rock, be damned. And then those fans who get pissed off, they'll come back thanking us later. Who knows? I'm not saying they're right if they did that. I'm just saying like they possibly could. Joseph Levine with a $9.99 donation. Shout out to Joseph. Thank you, man. That's amazing. I don't have an issue with the tackle pick. I get it. What I don't get is taking a left tackle at 5, moving him to right tackle seems unnecessarily risky for the 5th pick, assuming they sit. I agree.
Yes.
I 100% agree. And I think that's where the rub is. I don't think it's tackle. I think it's tackle at 5. I'm with you. I don't know how much of a deal it will be with a Joe Alt. I know there's one report, a month ago that was saying that he didn't look as comfortable on the right side. I don't know if it's true or not. I agree with you. So maybe this Chargers coaching staff thinks it's not a big deal. Maybe they think they're good. They believe in themselves and their coaching abilities and the player that they can say, we'll be just fine. If the Chargers are sitting there and Marvin Harrison Jr.'s on the board, we don't have to worry about this. I really don't think we got to worry about this. The only issue I have is if the trade back market is not rich enough and Marvin Harrison Jr. is not there, then it gets to, do they go Rome Odunze? Do they go Malik Neighbors? Or do they say, we're just going to protect Justin? Like, I don't know. And I guess, Jake, that's a question for you real quick. There's a lot of people asking this about the receiving core. People are talking a lot about Rome Odunze. So let's say Marvin Harrison Jr. is not on the board. You and I have talked about this. We talked about it before Keenan Allen was traded and after Keenan Allen was traded. Keenan Allen not being on this team changes the math.
Yes, it does.
And Rome Odunze probably is the better fit for the wide receiver room if they're looking for the boundary wide receiver X1 for the future. Like Malik Neighbors could be that eventually, maybe, but he's like your slot animal with the jetpack. Like he's your explosive guy, but if they get him, do they believe that Josh Palmer could be the X guy? Do they think Quentin Johnston could be the X guy? Do they go out and get a Boyd or a DJ Shark or someone else to be the X guy? I don't know. It feels like if they go Malik Neighbors, they got to go Malik Neighbors plus something. More than Rome Odunze plus something. Like you can get a plus something Rome Odunze from a far lower draft capital, in my opinion, than a Malik Neighbors plus an X receiver. That just seems bigger. Your take.
I mean, you can't knock Rome Odunze. I mean, some people even have Rome Odunze as their second wide receiver in this class for how they end up ranking him. If you caught the interview, I think that he did earlier on this week, who does he mirror his game after? He puts on a lot of tape of Keenan Allen and Devontae Adams. That's who he bases his game off of. We answered this question during a live show a few weeks back. Do not discount Rome Odunze. And truthfully, there's no wrong answer when it comes to these top 3 wide receivers because they all could add an element that is ultimately going to end up helping this team. I think if you look at what Jim Harbaugh wants to run with this offense, that to me, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze fit that bill more, especially with Rome Odunze with how physical he plays. And to think that Rome Odunze couldn't come into this wide receiver room and be that guy right off the jump, he could do that. Definitely could do that. So I honestly wouldn't have an issue if ultimately it ended up being a huge curveball, and if Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't on the board, that Rome Odunze ends up being the selection. I think it would actually make a lot of sense, and I think he would actually thrive in this offense with Justin Herbert throwing him the rock.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many comments in here. People are flying through this. Let's see. A lot of love for Rome Odunze, by the way. Man of the year with a bunch of bolts there. Fun question. If we trade back with the Giants for their second round pick and Neighbors and Harrison are gone, would you pull the trigger on Brock Bowers? So at 6.
Trade back with the Giants for the second round pick. And Neighbors.
So go from 5 to 6, add a second round pick.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that the Giants gave up their second round pick when they made that trade for Brian Burns. So do they still have a second round pick, or is that no?
In the comments, someone check it.
Yes, correct. Yeah, check.
Well, let's just say that's true for now.
So if it is true and Neighbors and Harrison are gone, do I pull the trigger on Brock Bowers? I'd probably still go with Dunze in this.
I think I would too. And that's Jake saying that. That's Jake saying that. Breezy B with a $13.99 donation. I can't pronounce the name. Viejas Willie over the top with a $100 donation.
Wow.
I got chills. Holy shit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Whoa. He says we should not worry.
Happy Sunday.
Good Lord. Jim knows better than anyone which players to select. No one knows the pros and cons of the players better than him. Hello from Playa del Carmen in Mexico. So, another valid point. We have a coach here who knows the college landscape and these players and the prospects more than any other coach in the NFL. Period. Fact. We do need to give him some credit and a leash to do what we think we brought him. They all wanted him to come in for. And that is to draft well. That is to get this team in a position to win championships. So how they do it, who are we to judge? Like, honestly, who are Chargers fans to judge how someone goes and builds a championship roster? When's the last time we saw that? It's been over a decade that I can remember. 14-2 was the last time that I was like confident that we had a better team. And look how that ended up. So Jim does know better than anyone else. And they've got currently 9 picks. Some people are projecting 12. That's a lot. Plus UDFAs. Plus there's more free agency. Are we putting too much stock in what happens at 5?
No, because the Chargers have never been in a position like this for the last decade with a GM that is used to making moves like this. With the Chargers being in this position and certain players like this are still on the board, it's the highest they've picked in years, where traditionally over the last several, it's just like you've had to sit there and you've had to wait and wait and wait for the player to drop to you. Obviously, in terms of positions like this, I would go back to the Rashawn Slater draft. And when it was always between either Rashawn Slater or Penei Sewell and who was going to end up coming out of that smelling like roses. And ultimately, I think it ended up working out great for both teams that selected them. But when you look just everything in the way that it is right now and how it stands, the Chargers are in a BPA position with this type of talent at the top side of the draft, and with a GM that knows how to maneuver the board and is going to be aggressive and is looking for someone to give up the farm if it means to move back from that. And look, even take that outside of 5. You just take that in the bigger scope of the entire draft. He can move down at any time. He can move up at any time. And from what we know from what Joe Ortiz values and the holes that you need to fill on this roster, couple that with Jim Harbaugh and the other layers of coaches that he has brought over from Michigan. Collectively, this brain trust is all going to listen to one another. The pulse that this draft war room should have on this college football draft should be insane. And that's why there's so much intrigue behind it. Because you look at the staff that the front office has now allowed this head coach to come in and build on his own. Carte blanche, Jim Harbaugh, go to work. Build your roster. You can do it however you want to slice it. Bringing in former players that he's coached. Bringing in former franchise centers to come back to a coaching position. There should not be any slight of excitement as it relates to what the Chargers are going to do at 5 and through the duration of 3 days for the NFL draft.
Agreed. Jake, I've acknowledged, I realize now it's all about the details. And apparently that was $100 in pesos.
Regardless. Thank you.
Still amazing. But someone wanted to be the guy that said, we'll put up here to make everybody feel better. 100 pesos to the US is $5.85.
Still,
I'll take $5.85. Shout out. Yes, thank you. Trent Super. Adunze. 100% best fit for the Bolts as a player, character, and work ethic. This guy is an absolute stud, and I hope we take him. Bolt TF up. You saw what he did at the combine. Restayed afterwards to try to get that. I think it's a 3-cone drill.
Man, if that didn't tell you enough, just it's like, how bad does this kid want it? I forget how many attempts that he actually ended up doing to ultimately get it. But yeah, work ethic, you can't question that whatsoever with him.
Let's see. A lot of folks are asking about, well, first, a lot of people are talking about tackles in general. People are saying tackle at 15. People are talking about last time we had 5, got a left tackle. This is a no-brainer. Marvin Harrison Jr. at 5. People remember, Robert says, people need to remember how vital Corey Linsley was to the offensive line while being a chain of command for that group. I'll draft the top center before drafting a top right tackle. That sounds like that's your opinion as well, Jake?
That's what I would do. If the Chargers were to, ultimately find themselves, let's just say, in the teens, and if there was a universe where you would say, okay, let's draft a JPJ, or if he happens to fall to the second round, a Zach Frazier, I wouldn't be mad at that at all. I understand that it's not your top priority need, but in general, how I feel about this center class, very bullish on it. I think it's vastly underrated. It started to pick up steam in terms of notoriety over the last month and a half or so. But yeah, I don't disagree, Dan. Honestly, I think the coaching is going to be one of the biggest things that's going to ultimately end up fixing this offensive line. And that's regardless whether you put priority. Let's just say, for example, if the Chargers end up selecting a tackle at any point, center at any point, collectively, I believe that this offensive line is going to be better, not just from personnel, but from coaching. You got to put some value into that as well.
Cade says, Harbaugh runs the show, not Ortiz. It's going to be Tackler Bowers. Kevin then replies back, no, go watch Joe Ortiz's presser. Or just go listen to what Jim Harbaugh said specifically about the whole Batman and Robin thing, about when those roles switch. Batman and Robin, Jim Harbaugh's Batman during the season, Joe Ortiz's Robin. During the offseason, it switches. This is from Jim Harbaugh's mouth, not mine. Joe Ortiz, the presser, to Kevin's point, talked about. He's the one that makes the final decision. He's the one that goes up and writes the name. I don't think that this is a just Jim Harbaugh says it. This isn't a dictatorship. They talked about the collaboration. I think everyone, Jake, you and I have talked about this plenty of times, the importance of not just collaboration, but shared vision and collaboration. So this isn't just like a Jim Harbaugh with the trump card. This isn't just Joe Ortiz with a hammer. Like, they've gone through this. That's why everyone was hired together, because of the shared vision and then being able to collaborate on that. So no, this isn't just Jim Harbaugh's thing. It's just not. Let's see. Question. Tanner asks, I love all these questions. By the way, keep them coming. We've got about 20 minutes or so left. If you have comments, topics, questions, put them in the chat. We'll do our best to go through them. Jake Tanner says, would you guys rather trade the 5th pick with the Vikings for their 11th, 23rd, and Jordan Addison, or 11th, 23rd, and I'm assuming a 2025 first-round pick?
I think I would actually probably go with the second option. I would.
The first-round pick?
Yes. Yeah, I would do that because, look, again, you have, and I know what Jordan Addison could, I mean, again, this is a total fantasy type of scenario, and Jordan Addison would not end up coming after 1 year of being selected from the Vikings, but I would lean towards the second one just from the standpoint of the chart. I mean, yes, would Jordan Addison fill kind of your Keenan Allen role essentially in that circumstance? Yes, but to me, I would still stick with future draft capital. That's what Joe Ortiz values. Who knows what it is that you're going to ultimately end up needing in the 2025 draft, but to end up getting an additional pick to go variety of different ways, that's the way I would do it.
Someone put in here the idea that since 2019, the hit rate for top 10 wide receivers has been 100%. I think I heard that. Larry Reed put this. Since 2019, top 10 selected wide receivers have a success hit rate of 100%, including 2 of them already playing in the Super Bowl, Devonta Smith and Jamar Chase. I think this was Matt Money Smith and company, I think, that had talked about this. Or no, I think it was Daniel Jeremiah, Move the Sticks with Bucky Brooks talked about this. The hit rate for wide receivers that high is like dang good. And then you go towards the back half of the first round, or more importantly, like day 2,
it changes.
It drops off like precipitously. And there's a lot of guys basically at hindsight, a year or 2 later, they look at day 2 and you're kind of like, they're just a bunch of guys versus the ones who are day 1 top 10. 100% agree. Like, I'm not saying that it's not a good pick to go wide receiver. I'm with you. I've been on record. I want them to. I just don't know how much they value the wide receiver position. Period. I don't know the answer to that. Layer Reed then, Jake, gives us a $9.99 donation, and that's in dollars, by the way. I made sure to check the symbol there.
Well done.
I appreciate you guys and what you do. Larry appreciates you as well.
Thank you.
No need to overthink pick number 5. Get the player at the premium position that gives you tremendous value for the next 5 years. I'm pretty sure that is low-key saying get the wide receiver.
Exactly.
But premium position could also be tackled, but I digress. Breezy asks, do you guys think the Bolts can block the Cards from trading back at 4?
Can block the Cards from trading back at 4. I guess I'm a little bit confused on this.
I think, well, here's the thing. I think no matter what the Chargers can do, the Cardinals have more capital. Or excuse me, Cardinals have more capital. So like a team wanting to trade up, they could trade up to Arizona and have the higher likelihood of getting their guy than going to 5 and hoping that Arizona doesn't pick the guy or doesn't trade out to another team. Because if a team trades to the Chargers, another team could then jump them to the Cardinals.
I guess the only way to...
Well, that's reading it wrong. I might be reading it wrong.
No, I was just going to say, I guess the only way that this would even be actually possible to do, let's go back to the last week of the season and actually have the Arizona kicker make the field goals, to which solidifies the Chargers in the 4th position and Arizona at number 5. And then we're not even having this conversation.
Yep. Thomas Costello, friend of the show. BPA is in the eye of the beholder. What does the team need most for their schemes determines that. Another big injury to Justin changes things dramatically. I would agree and disagree. Like, BPA is BPA. And the only thing I would put on there is like the disclaimer of that probably excludes quarterback if you have one. Otherwise, like, BPA is BPA. And it shouldn't be dependent on what the scheme is, because that's the whole point of BPA. You get the best player available regardless. But it is in the eye of the beholder. Michael Pesci says, Cardinals have 11 picks. Let's stop dreaming. They are taking Marvin Harrison Jr. We need to discuss what we do after him. This is the scenario that I think Chargers fans should brace for. is, let's say they're sitting there at 5. Quarterback needy team is calling up the Chargers and saying, like, hey, we want to go get JJ or May or whoever. We'll offer you 11 and 23. Ortiz plays hardball and says no. Then clock winds down. They got to make their pick. That's the scenario that I think, I don't want to say concerns me, but brings in the tackle at 5 scenario much more than if Arizona trades out, quarterback's taken, MHJ is there. Like, that's like we talk about, like, that's the trump card where it's like, and maybe they see Romadunze as that too, or Neighbors, or who, I don't know. But it feels like Marvin Harrison Jr. is just like a guy that I just can't see them passing up.
Could ultimately end up flying that way down. Joe Ortiz mentioned that he has an expectation that he believes quarterback is the way that it's going to go to start the draft. Other GMs apparently have felt that sentiment, but again, this is draft season. Not all the smoke leads to ultimately ends up leading to fire. You just got to make sure to follow the right smoke.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? This is a situation that can end up playing out like that. As we know, the Arizona Cardinals GM isn't shy to move around the board, whether it means trading back and then trading right back up if he needs to. So, again, I most likely see it playing out that it would be hard for Arizona to move off of Marvin Harrison Jr. Ultimately, I do see it like that. But, much like in the Chargers have talked about, if there is a king's ransom that you can offer a team to do that, I wouldn't put it past the Arizona Cardinals to move off of that pick, depending on how far they fall. So, who knows? Most likely scenario, I say it as Marvin Harrison Jr. goes to Arizona.
I think I agree. Laos to Bruin. Herbert can't will a wide receiver separate against man coverage or haul in a pass. Need a true separator with good hands, whatever round that is. I'm with you. When we talked to Trevor Sycamore, we asked him specifically about separators because that's what the team lacks, is separation, aside from Darius Davis, which who knows what he's going to turn into as a receiver. We know what he's like on special teams. I agree with you. But again, I think a lot of times Chargers fans generally are stuck in the how we've seen the offense run with this Chargers team the past 5 years or so, with Justin Herbert kind of being the one who's throwing the rock 40, 50 times. Like, that's just not going to be the case with this team. And so, while I agree with you that they need separators, whatever round that is, like that, I'm with you. I don't necessarily think that they need that separator or to be able to catch a pass contested in that number 5 overall pick. But like if they do the 11 to 23 thing with the Vikings, and let's say they go tackle at 11 or Bowers at 11 if the Jets don't take him, and at 23 you can go receiver. There's probably, you can do an AD Mitchell, maybe. You can, that's probably too rich for Roman Wilson. You could probably go, maybe Brian Thomas Jr. I think he's being underrated in terms of like what he can do athletically that we haven't seen at LSU because he hasn't had to be it. I think there are options there. What else, Jake? Ruben has a fun one.
Before we get to this one from Ruben, I actually want to ask just a side question to the chat because I'm very interested in this, and I was just thinking about this because I know everything that we have coming up for Thursday, Dan, and what we're going to be doing for the 3 days of the NFL draft. Answer in the chat. What is it? What are you going to be doing during the NFL draft? Do you have any like superstitious type things? Whether it's like, you wear a certain player's jersey or you have to be sitting on a certain spot in the couch or this, that, and the other. I'd like to know just specifically, what are you guys going to be doing during the NFL draft? Would love to know that.
That's going to be a fun one. I guarantee you there's going to be some people with some crazy superstition.
That's why I asked the question. I want to hear this.
Ruben Trevino said, I saw a mock where the Bolts trade with Minnesota and draft Latu at 11 and Jazon Newton at 23.
Oh, my God.
I mean, Which sidebar, it's weird. I've seen like Jason Newton like not in the first round in mock drafts now.
Schrager did not have Johnny Newton, I think, in the first round, which was a wild thought considering this entire path that we've gone through the draft to now get to this point, and then to have him out of the first round. That's bold.
But that would be bold. This scenario though. Like, I think I would be torn. Like, a part of me would be like pissed. Like, seriously, we're not doing anything on offense at all to help Justin, whether that's a center, an offensive lineman, or like a center, tackle, tight end, or receiver. Like, but then I'm like, well, hold on.
How long are you really going to stay mad for? Dan, they were talking. I think it was Mel Kiper was talking in his latest podcast that the record for offensive players taken in the first round is 19. They're now expecting 21 offensive players that could possibly break that record this year, which is going to push a lot of defensive players down to the second round. And look, talking as someone who would love to see a universe where somehow Latu ended up being on the Chargers, I wouldn't be mad at that at all. I know that we're talking about everything as it relates to wide receivers and getting Justin Herbert help, and that is definitely the first message from this front office and this coaching staff.
But talk about what they're going to prioritize. Help. Give him a defense. How about that for help?
Hey, Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are probably not going to be here after this season. So, if you were to tell me that your future is going to be Tuli and Latu,
but your present is Bosa. Your present is Bosa, Mack, Tuli, Latu, and Newton.
Look, I'm not saying that's going to happen, and that's a very bold type of trade scenario and selection. But I'll just stand pat and say, like, look, you may have passed on the wide receiver and the offensive lineman, but you got two damn good defensive players.
Yeah. Lost Bruin says if QBs go 1 through 4, it'll be the first time in history to see a trade for that. See a trade down as the most likely option. They need depth all over. Which he's saying, I think Cardinals stay and pick, then the Chargers possibly trade back. I've said this for a few weeks now. Like, I just don't think that this quarterback class is worthy of 1 through 4 going. I could be wrong. Like,
oh no, you're right on that, Dan.
Jim Harbaugh's done God's work to get JJ McCarthy to where he is.
This is the beauty part about why people talk about the quarterback tax and what it ultimately ends up taking to move up in a position like this, where it's one of the more coveted quarterback classes in recent memory in terms of ones being this valued. And I guess we have to thank Jim Harbaugh in this circumstance for really starting the JJ McCarthy hype train from where it was a few months ago to where it is standing right now. But this is what the quarterback class or the quarterback tax does for teams. And this is precisely what Joe Ortiz is talking about. It may not be, JJ McCarthy could be rated the 23rd guy on anybody's big board as it currently stands right now, but could ultimately end up going number 4 or number 5. And what tax is an opposing team willing to pay to come up to get him?
I mean, you heard the whole, like, I'm not looking for a fair trade thing from Joe Ortiz, which was just like, talk to me. Talk to me again. All right, Jake, we have maybe 10, 15 minutes max here for the rest of this. You and I, let's pledge. We're going to go rapid fire with our responses. Let's do it. Blaze through because we got a ton of questions here that I want to make sure we get to, because honestly, it's incredible how many people come to these live shows now. And I just think back to like a couple years ago, Jake, when we did these, and like, there was like 100 people, or there'd be like 150 people, and they got to 200. And then like, we're just blazing through 500, 1,000, depending on the day. Like, it's insane to me. And so like, it's always, I don't know, bittersweet. I get chills thinking about it, and you guys are the best. Please do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe. It does help us a ton. I think we're only like 100 or something subscribers away from 7,000. I think
we're getting there.
So like, could we get there before draft day? I don't know. Oh, also, we have a giveaway that we're doing on draft day. Pick your selection of choice. Go to our X handle. You'll see it there pinned All you got to do is, I think it's like, subscribe, and reply with a screenshot. And you can win a jersey of any player selection of your choice this Chargers makes in this draft class. So let's say they pick Marvin Harrison Jr., or let's say they pick Latu, or they pick Audric Estime. You're super pumped about that. You get to pick who your jersey is, and we will give that to you if you win. I think that ends day 1, draft day. All right, here we go. Jake, Dan, do you guys think the looming contract extension for Slater and the $8.7 million owed to Pipkins will matter to Ortiz drafting a tackle at 5? A lot of cap percentage dedicated towards a tackle spot. We had Brett Coleman on. He talked about it as a 3% of the salary cap would be dedicated to Trey Pipkins.
Yes.
3%. So do I think that matters to them in the long run? Honestly, no. As crazy as that sounds, no, I don't think so.
There's an argument to be made for both sides of it, though, because
Agreed.
We're at this point right now. Trey Pipkins is still in the roster. In terms of the Rashawn Slater extension, I think they have, moving off the Keenan Allen money, that's given you a lot more flexibility for next year and what that extension is going to be. So that's going to be a big help. But in terms of this again for Trey, yes, I get Brett's point in terms of, yes, that's only 3% of your overall salary cap and however much more it's going to end up going up next year. But at the same token,
as the voice goes up,
you're going to pay that much money essentially for a guy to be a backup and select a tackle at 5. Still can't wrap my head around that.
Billy Silverman with a $5 donation, $4.99. Again, paying attention to the details. It's also in dollars. What would you think if they traded back and went with Bowers plus corner instead of a first-round receiver? Jake, what say you?
Look, we just got it off this conversation in terms of how deep this wide receiver class is. You'd have to think definitely then if this would be the case that's playing out, that the Chargers be prioritizing wide receiver with the pick 37 in the second round. I wouldn't hate this if you're talking about trading back to that point in time. If we're seemingly talking about 11, that would mean that you're out of the realm for the top 3 wide receivers. Is that a little bit too rich for Brian Thomas? Most likely. So you're finding another way to get a weapon for Justin Herbert, a guy who Jim Harbaugh really tried recruiting to Michigan. So he's not unfamiliar with Brock Bowers whatsoever. And then if you ended up doing corner, which is, again, is one of your biggest needs that you have, I still believe that you can't come out of day 2 without selecting a cornerback with any of your first picks at all. So I would understand it. I still think tight end now has kind of been pushed to more of a luxury pick, given what they've done in free agency. But you'd have to rework your draft board, and I wouldn't necessarily put it out of the realm of possibility. Again, the Chargers can go so many different directions here.
Jake posed the question, what are you doing on draft day? What superstitions do you have? We got some fun ones in here, Jake. Not going to be on Twitter, says DZ, because I don't want our pick leaked. I'd rather be surprised. That is a thing that has bitten me so many times.
Smart. I'll answer both of those questions, actually, because this would be the 15th year that we have done a draft party at my domicile. That this is all credit to my late stepdad, who originally got me into A, the Chargers franchise, and B, the NFL draft in general. And the best part about this is that each year that has come and gone, the draft contingent of fans that we have, there's usually about 16 or 17 teams that are all represented at my house. And things get wild, especially on day 1. Especially with other guys with their own draft perspectives and people freaking out about who they're going to take. Long story short, I still have a buddy who's coming this year who was a Tennessee Titans fan and who was sitting there when the A.J. Brown trade ended up taking place. And I wish I could have gotten it on camera because it was.
Wasn't that the A.J. Brown plus Caleb Farley year? Or was that Caleb Farley the prior year?
No, I'm sorry. You're right. It was the prior year. But
we were like, oh, we like him.
AJ Brown getting traded. I thought my buddy John was having a conniption, honestly, when everything took place, and it was it was magic to watch it. The best part about it is that my other buddy Kevin, who's a Philadelphia Eagles fan, is just sitting back there drinking a beer, just pumping his fist, going like, "Hey, all right." This ended up playing out.
That was so good. Let's see. Kevin says, my superstition is making a bag of popcorn, making sure every kernel is popped. Bruised Frog, he'll be in Detroit, wearing the gear. Have fun, man. That's going to be fun. Someone's doing a pub crawl, I think I saw in here.
There's a bunch of pub crawls happening for draft party this week.
Yeah, Larry says, sit on a beach in the Dominican Republic. If they draft well, I'll be making a yearly sacrifice for Bolt Nation.
I love how everything hedges on the NFL draft for what's going to be happening for the upcoming season for you.
Important question. Man of the year says, one has to go. Steak, fried chicken, shrimp, or ribs? In my opinion, shrimp could GTFO. I could care less about shrimp.
Yeah, look, I like all four of these items, but shrimp would definitely probably fall to the least favorite.
Shrimp is ocean bugs, says someone. Okay. Victor says, I must say the excitement could be cut with a knife. Phew. Let's see.
Palpable.
Charlie, friend of the show, says, predict what happens at 5 with a $1.99 donation. Shout out, Charlie. Thank you, man.
Chargers trade out.
So nothing happens at 5. So pick at 5. Pick at 5 is someone drafts a quarterback.
Yes, Minnesota is coming up. Yes, that's. I'll say it like that.
Okay. Let's see what else we got here. DZ says, did Harbaugh also recruit Marvin Harrison Jr. or no?
I don't recall that. I could be totally wrong, but I don't recall that.
I don't remember that, honestly. Maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. I know we can find it out. There's a site that you can find it. I think he did, honestly. Robert asks, how would you guys feel if Marvin Harrison Jr. is there at 5 and the Chargers decide to pass on him? Would they regret that decision, in your opinion? So this is the scenario that I think unanimously would be like doomsday. At least outside the building. If the Chargers are having Marvin Harrison Jr. sitting there at 5 and they don't trade back and they don't select Marvin Harrison Jr., like, bro, like, I do not want to be coming on here on a live show. I'll tell you that much.
Speaking about speaking as the trade advocate for the past 10 years of what he has wanted this team to do, this is the situation that I have talked with Dan several times. Because for me, I would say, yeah, great, finally. They made a move to trade back, acquired some extra draft capital because they have so many holes to fill. But in terms of Dan saying, is like, okay, is this the doomsday type of scenario? For about a half hour, it's going to feel like that because you're going to tell me it's like, oh my God, they moved off Marvin Harrison Jr. and they moved back to 11 to select who? Who do you ultimately end up selecting at 11? That's where I'm torn because, of course, now you're in a position where you could finally trade down, and you mean to tell me that Marvin Harrison Jr. could possibly be there at 5? Of course, the football gods are a fickle bunch, as I love to say. I was just, in that type of scenario, I would rather Marvin Harrison Jr. be gone so that scenario has no shot of playing out. But this is the conundrum, and this is the drama that Chargers fans could possibly be thrown into for the better part of 30 to 40 minutes before they ultimately end up selecting.
No, wait, dude. If that happens, you think that anxiety and that frustration only lasts 30 minutes? Bro, that's lasting for until year 2. No way, dude. People will go crazy.
Well, look, this is why I feel better about it. Because
no way.
If Joe Ortiz, what Joe Ortiz said earlier this week is ultimately true. If you were Joe Ortiz, what would it take you to move off of Marvin Harrison Jr.? Just ask yourself. Just ask yourself.
Whatever it is, it's an unfair trade.
And that's why I said it. It all depends on the ultimate get back that you get in that trade.
Okay, so you're saying if they got a haul that was
they got
3 first-round picks and something. Okay.
I get it. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be, shocked and slightly disappointed for that period of time. Ultimately, until they ended up making that pick. But this is some of the issues that you have to take into account. For me, I don't think that if Marvin Harrison Jr. was still on the board, that the Chargers would ultimately move off. I don't. I think that would take a huge, huge haul to move them off of him.
Agreed. I agree. Buy or sell. Herbert has more rushing yards than Quentin has receiving yards. All right, guys, let's not be disrespectful here. Good Lord. Bruce Frog says, I can see this team being built similar to the Lions, just a bruising offensive line and a pretty equal split between run and pass. And if you're defining it that way, yeah, I would agree. Rounding out, Jake, any topics or questions on this that I missed? I know I've been flying through these because I can't keep up, but parting thoughts.
We still got 4 days to go to the NFL draft. We still are going to be talking about a lot in between now and then. I know we're still planning our mock draft right before the NFL draft, which should be a lot of fun. Dan and I also want to talk about our guys that we really like for this draft, and whether we're talking day 1, day 2, day 3, kind of taking it into a huge scope in that circumstance. But there is a lot to talk about in that front. This is what just gets me so amped, Dan, is just football conversation and when it regards to the NFL draft, because there's so much drama, there's so much intrigue as it relates to ultimately what's going to happen, what's going to take place. There will be a shape of my ass embedded into my couch after the end of Saturday because I will not move for 3 days. That is going to be where I'm going to reside. And I love it every single year. It's so great to be a part of this banter with all of you, because we all have our own draft takes. We all have our own opinions, and some of us are higher on certain guys than others, and some of us are lower on certain guys than others. But this is what this is all about. And I love every bit of this.
Amen. Question came in. What's the alternate helmet you guys want? This one. This is the one I want.
Oh, I mean,
this would be sick. Give me this one, please. Let's get a couple more here before we get out of here. Is this the most exciting draft season yet? Jake, you've been a fan of drafts for a long time. Let's just say in the last decade. Hell, since you've been doing the parties, can you remember a draft season this exciting?
Like an overall draft season getting as hyped up to this, it's hard to argue that this is it, because of the fact of who's now in control of the front office and the coaching staff in this regard. I feel like I probably feel like the most exciting draft that I was ever actually a part of was the year that the Chargers selected Derwin James #1. Because of all the intrigue that was surrounding, yes, because of all the intrigue that was surrounding that particular draft with that quarterback class that was coming out during that year, and then Derwin James falling to them, and ultimately the Chargers ended up selecting him when all the perception was elsewhere that they were going to go with that pick, not expecting Derwin to be there. That was the most exciting draft I probably ever have been a part of. In terms of build-up and intrigue and everything like that, it's not even close to this year. And it's strictly because of who is in control, the coaching staff that is so familiar with all of these college players that are coming out now. That's going to be so advantageous to this Chargers team in terms of their overall draft strategy moving forward. And I'm so looking forward to seeing how they're going to finalize this roster.
If you ask Willie, pay attention to details this time. $100 in pesos, or 100 pesos. Joe Ortiz said he was doing this. He's doing the select best player available. You think that if we trade down, you would select Bowers if he is the best available? Sorry for the USD, the 100 USD guys. So don't apologize. That's on us and our stupidity for getting so excited about $100. Bowers over tackle. Where does Bauer? Is he higher than offensive tackle 1 for you?
Yeah. You're talking to a guy who just a couple months ago had an argument with Dan about the possibility of the Chargers selecting Brock Bowers at 5 and Dan standing pat and saying Malik Neighbors at 5. Now, obviously, that was before free agency. A lot of things have changed since then. But it's not a knock on Brock Bowers. I would still love to see Brock Bowers be a part of this team, all things considered. And in this particular circumstance, yeah, I would consider Brock Bowers before I would consider an offensive tackle on my board. But my board is not what's in the Chargers war room right now.
Tay Jackson says, did Herbert finish with a higher QBR than Patrick Mahomes this year?
look, until we know who the wide receivers are going to be and knowing how much Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman want to run the ball, I can't say that would end up panning out right now.
Kevin asks, when's the next fan-driven mock draft? A lot of people are asking for this.
We got 4 days left to go.
We'll do one. Let's try to do one.
Take your pick.
Let's try to do one. $9.99 donation from Larry. Again, you guys are crazy. I love it. Over under Chargers making 1.5 trades starting day 2. Wait, did that include day 2?
Starting day 2.
So that means
are you talking about that their first in this scenario? Are you talking about their first trade possibly being 37 and then having another trade take place throughout the rest of the draft?
It sounds like this is before pick 33. The Chargers make over under 1.5 trades.
Starting day 2. I mean, I'll say 2 trades in general over the course of 3 days. So I would say over to this.
Because this would be like, okay, let's say they trade the Minnesota for 11 and 23, and then they keep 11, trade up for 23 or down for 23. That would be 2. I'm gonna go under. But I'm down for chaos.
Really?
Over.
Go for chaos. Choose violence, Dan.
Well, you just said you do 2 total. Okay, fine.
you know you would love to see it.
I mean, again, I would love it. If they think Bowers is BPA at 5, do you think he pulls the trigger? Yes, I do. If they think he's the BPA, then yeah, absolutely.
If they think he's the BPA at 5, look, probably not. But if you were to put it in perception to where he thought that, maybe he would.
Would you rather have a first-round corner or Bowers? Asked Brad.
Now we're getting interesting, are we? Because I've said if the Chargers ultimately ended up trading back to 11, my board would completely shift. And again, this is how much free agency changes things. If you were to tell me right now with this DB room and having the opportunity to get CB1 or tight end 1, given what the tight end room looks like and given what the cornerback room looks like, it's going to be cornerback for me 100%.
Yeah. Otto with a great closing remark. Rounds 1 through 3 are getting all the attention, but I expect the staff to own rounds 4 through 7. Yes, we talked about how important Jim Harbaugh is to this team as a coach, but also as an understanding of this draft class and the next 2 probably. It's be big. And I think that's what has a lot of Chargers fans excited. Last question, Jake. This is the last one. We're going to end it on a fun one. Kevin asks, would you eat a bowl of spiders and down that with a cup of gasoline if it guarantees Marvin is a Charger? Bowl of spiders, cup of gasoline.
I love you all, but you got some wild scenarios if it meant guaranteeing certain players.
I'd let Jake do it
on the team.
I'd let Jake do it. Does tequila count as gasoline?
Well, the best part about this is now I'm thinking like ahead. I almost feel like I'd be the sacrificial lamb because I probably wouldn't be able to live to see Marvin Harrison Jr. play for the Chargers because I would be gone about 10 minutes after this. But
yeah,
if it meant it, no, I wouldn't do it because I have arachnophobia. So you're tapping into one of my deepest fears already, and then possibly putting me out for good on top of that. No, I'm sorry. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, forgot Lockout says, the offer better come with the Super Bowl for me to even consider it. I'm with you.
Now, that's someone who plays the long game. That's someone who plays the long game.
Yep. Yeah. All right, guys. This is good. We're going to end it here. We're at an hour and 15 already. Sorry I went over. You guys have been insane. This has been so much fun. Thank you all. We're 4 days away. We're so close. Again, if you have not done so, please go check out the giveaway we're doing. The qualifications are on X, LAC_unleashed. Good luck to you there. Hit us with a like and subscribe. We appreciate all the comments, all the feedback. These live shows are probably the favorite parts of what we do here for Chargers Unleashed, and we love interacting with all of you. Stay patient, stay calm. We're so close. I'm telling you as much as I'm telling myself that because I'm about to freak the F out once we get to draft day. We got a lot of things coming for you. For Jake, Dan, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network, this has been a blast. We will talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.